Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison. I want to welcome you to this session of Humanity Rising. As we begin today, I want to just comment on what's going on over the last 6 hours now in Gaza, as the Israeli authorities have ordered the evacuations of Rafah, the eastern part of Rafah, so tens of thousands of people are now being forced to evacuate as Benjamin Netanyahu, as he's been announcing over the last couple of days, has indicated that the final assault on Rafah has begun. There was an interview on Al Jazeera, which has now been banned. The Israelis banned Al Jazeera in Israel in advance of the assault on Rafah, knowing that it's going to be mass slaughter at levels that we haven't seen in world history for many, many years. And so there was an interview on Al Jazeera of a woman who said that she had been forced to move by the Israelis 9 times over the last 6 months. They have nothing left. Children are famished and starving, and now they have to move again. The Israelis have made no preparation, no water, no food, nothing for where they're now forcing the Palestinians to go as they launch an assault on Gaza. It's an extraordinary thing that is happening. Meanwhile, over the weekend, there was a news blip that indicated that the U.S. Military had paused some arms shipment to Israel. And there was a momentary hope that maybe this meant something, but it was confirmed today by Axios, one of the online news papers, that that's not in fact the case. And I want to read you what the National Security Council said to Axios when they inquired as to the meaning of this pause. They said it was purely bureaucratic. The United States, they said, and I quote, has surged billions of dollars in security assistance to Israel since the October 7th attacks, passed the largest ever supplemental appropriation for emergency assistance to Israel, led an unprecedented coalition to defend Israel against Iranian attacks, and will continue to do what is necessary to ensure Israel can defend itself from the threats it faces. So that's where the United States stands on Israel. It's now being revealed that the Israelis have been briefing the Americans for some time about their assault on Rafah, and the Americans had no problem with the assault. They just wanted to make sure that it was done in a humane way. So the Israelis have started that humanitarian evacuation on Gaza by forcing people basically into devastated areas without food, without water, without tents, without anything. And will probably, like they've done in almost all the safe zones to which they forced Palestinians, they'll probably start bombing that, maybe even before the end of the day. The intent is genocide. The intent is the extermination of Palestine and the Palestinian people. And Benjamin Netanyahu and the Israeli government are making that crystal clear. And in fact, Netanyahu over the weekend spoke to the Jewish people in Hebrew in Israel, saying that we are going to go alone. We don't need the support of any of the Gentiles. We Jews are going to do whatever is necessary to defend our interests. left unstated, of course, is that they could not complete the genocide of Palestine. They couldn't have occupied Palestine and the West Bank as they have for the last 75 years without the support of the Gentiles. They wouldn't exist without the support of the Gentiles. But Netanyahu has worked Israel up into a frenzy of hysteria, which I'm going to be talking about in a couple of days. I'm going to be talking about the relationship between Zionism and the American notion of manifest destiny. They're intertwined, and they conclude exactly the same things. And they've used exactly the same tactics for exactly the same strategy: the elimination of peoples that they consider to be less than they are, the chosen ones. It's interesting to note that here in the United States, protests have surged. I was at George Washington University over the weekend and spoke to many of the protesters. It was a very inspiring experience. The DC police so far have refused to arrest, even though ordered to by the university president. And I spoke with the police, and they said, hey, this is DC. If we arrested every protester that came into DC, we would be doing it every day of the week. We know how to deal with protesters, and as long as they remain nonviolent, friendly, keep the law, this is a free country. At least it is, the police officer said, in the District of Columbia. Meanwhile, at the University of Virginia, they cracked down yesterday in a very coercive and brutal way as the state police came in full riot gear and eliminated the encampment, arrested all the protesters. And the infraction was that they could stay where they were if they had umbrellas. But when it started to rain, several of them got tents with coverings, and those were considered so egregious that they had to come in and wipe the encampment out and put people in jail. Victoria Moore, who's the Dean of Students at Ubiquity University, colleague, friend, who taught for many years at the University of Virginia, wrote me an email in which she reminded me that back in 2017, in the same place, the Nazis held a march calling for death to the Jews. And the police stood by and did nothing. And the governor talked about the importance of free speech. But when it comes to the Palestinians, there is no free speech. And that sacrilege against the First Amendment, guaranteeing every US citizen the right to speak freely, is being increasingly abridged in one sector or another, in no sector more ferociously than against those speaking up for Palestine. You may have heard that Chris Hedges, the great journalist, Pulitzer Prize winner, news reporter for the New York Times and many prestigious papers, he's been taken off the air by the Real News Network, for his increasing discussions of what's going on in Gaza. And I just want to say that I will be continuing to talk about this every day, because we're witnessing one of the greatest crimes in world history right before our eyes, live on TV, supported by the USA. Breaks my heart. Completely breaks my heart that this country, that the world would stand by and let Israel do what it's doing. It's astonishing. It's an indictment against every notion of what civilized humanity even means. Even means. So we're going to continue to look this crime right in the eye. Right in the eye. We cannot look away. Not on this one. Who knows what will happen? There may be machinations going on behind the scenes that will redeem the situation. Let us hope and let us pray, because there's only one man in the world that could stop what Israel has just begun, and that's the President of the United States. So whatever prayers you can pray, whoever it is in the US Congress or government that you can call, most especially the White House, let your voice be heard on this day. So thank you, everyone, for joining us on Humanity Rising. It's deeply meaningful to be able to take on these grave and momentous issues in our time. I want to now turn to our visitation by extraterrestrials, a matter of utmost consequence for the human race that we've been covering. We've had many different sessions now, many different presentations. Many of you were a little disturbed by the presentations by Reed and Marshall Summers, who were asserting that the extraterrestrials, the aliens who are on planet Earth, are governed by an agenda very much like the way humans have treated each other and treated the planet, that they are rapacious, that they are using cunning and manipulation of our attitudes and psycho-emotionalities to take over, to enslave, and to deny human sovereignty. And that we need to wake up to that the aliens are not our friends. That's a point of view. We offer it in the spirit of truth pursued, not truth possessed. And one of the reasons why we have offered what Reed and Marshall Summers are saying is because it wakes people up to think about what's going on. It's not a matter of agreeing with them. It's a matter of paying attention to the reality that we are not alone, with advanced beings who show themselves only in a gossamer way, and whose impact on our world has been in motion for nearly 80 years with an agenda that is not our own. Today, we want to hear from a woman from Australia, Mary Rodwell, who's come to my attention recently, and because it's the middle of the night in Australia, she says, I just can't be coherent in the middle of the night the way I would like to. So over the weekend, we did a video recording from my little apartment near the office here in Washington, D.C. And I just want to encourage everybody to watch that, because you'll find, as you'll see, I was completely inspired by what this woman is telling us, that most of the encounters with the extraterrestrials are life-changing and healing and positively effective. So for Mary, the extraterrestrials that at least the thousands of people she has talked with and counseled around the world, including and mostly children, which I hadn't really taken in, is a heartwarming, inspiring, perspective that, along with others, just take it in and let it work in your heart and soul in whatever way the Spirit guides. And that's the best way to participate in Humanity Rising, is just to take it in and let the Spirit guide as a fractal of the extraordinarily complex hologram that is human and planetary life in our time. So thank you, everyone. You will note that the recording ends when I close it out, so she won't be joining the after chat, but she's an inspiration that we're definitely going to have back live at some point. So here it is. Mary Rodwell.
Perfect.
Good. Hello, Mary, and welcome from Queensland, Australia. Delightful to meet you at long last. I've heard so much about you, and of course, knowing Edgar Mitchell and his fascination with all things cosmic and extraterrestrial, you being one of the founding members of his foundation is something we want to hear a lot about. But as we get started, just tell us a little bit about your background and your pathway to getting interested in the UFO extraterrestrial phenomenon.
The weird and the wonderful is another way of putting it.
Indeed.
Well, I started out professionally as a state registered nurse and actually a state certified midwife in England. So that was my beginning of my professional life. But as I got married and had 3 children, expecting to go back into nursing at some point, I was invited to learn about counselling, which I knew nothing about. It was very early days where counselling was offered in medical practices. So I, out of interest, thought, well, I'll look into this. And I was trained as a professional counsellor working in a medical practice for 5 years. What was fascinating to me was looking at prevention rather than cure in terms of health, because I realized there was a big psychological and emotional component to illness. And that fascinated me. I will say to you that I've always had an interest in the weird and the wonderful. I'm one of these, I think I was born with a book in my hand, trying to work out this life and what it all meant. From a very early age, as I say, if it was weird and wonderful, then I had a book on it somewhere or whatever. So
Me
gathering.
too. From a very early age, I was a voracious reader. Somehow it was a powerful portal to me. So I'm delighted to meet another bookworm.
Oh, I'm pretty certain I'll need to be buried with a book in my hand. I'm pretty certain of that. So there was always this anything unusual. I was always seeking what's it all about, why are we here, all those big questions.
Yeah.
I remember as a 3-year-old, now this, I didn't intend to say this, but I'll say it anyway, is I was about 3.5 and I've never forgotten this thought. And I was looking out the window and it was the middle of the afternoon and my mum was having a siesta. And everything was very still. And I still remember this thought saying, I wonder if things only move when I look at them.
Mhm.
Now, you tell me where that came from, because it certainly wasn't a 3.5-year-old child, but I've never forgotten it. It was came out of the ether or whatever. So there's been this seeking side of me and always trying to make sense of things and connect the dots. I suppose, this is what I've been trying to do, is connect the cosmic dots, wondering where they're going to lead. But getting back to counseling, it also opened up when I came to Australia, because I decided to stick with counseling. And I worked with grief and bereavement for 3 years. And what was interesting with that was working with hospice and the big questions, when someone's got supposedly a couple of weeks to live or whatever, they're looking at the big questions: what happens after death, all those kind of things.
Yeah.
I also heard about other unusual things that people had experienced in deep grief, where they would sense presences, whether they would get information, and some of them would have dialogue with, grandma or whatever. And for them, it was profound. And for them, it was mostly very positive and very healing. So, my parameters were pretty broad by this time. I was looking at reincarnation. I was looking at a whole range of things. This led me ultimately to working in another counseling practice, doing again a whole range of different kinds of counseling, from children, adolescents, pregnant, the whole gamut. But in the middle of that, I was invited to expand my multidimensional self. By that, I mean working out what was intuition, what do people sense, how do they sense it, what we would call intuitives and what have you. And I was in a group with 2 clinical psychologists. So I remember thinking, if I'm going around the bend, I'm going around the bend in good company. You know what I mean? It was like, we're all going around the bend together. But what it did was open me up to my multidimensional awareness in a very real way, which surprised me, because I considered myself to be pretty normal, pretty grounded, pretty down to earth kind of person. But I realized that actually this was something we all had, that in many ways was suppressed or denied. And for me, that was pretty obvious that a lot of our programming is, unless you can see it, touch it, our 5 senses, it's not real, all this. So I was challenging very much the paradigm because of what I was experiencing. But on top of that, I learned hypnosis. I became a clinical hypnotherapist, and exploring issues for people, not only what appeared to be in this life, but what appeared to what we call past lives. So that was when I came across Dr. John Mack's book, Abduction, Human Encounters with Aliens. And he was a psychiatrist at Harvard University, couldn't get more credible than that. And he wrote, as some will know, at least 2 books on this. Very convinced at the end of it that what people were speaking about with their interactions with non-human intelligences was real. Yeah. He was absolutely convinced. I met him only the once, sadly, before his accident. So I didn't get a chance for in-depth conversation with him, but valued that. And I also came across the book synchronously. It always seems to happen that way, doesn't it? With Communion, with Whitley Strieber, who was an experiencer. And I remember thinking at the time, what fascinating stories, first time I'd really come to explore the possibility that we've been visited, that this was real. And I thought, it must be very rare, and expected it to be rare. Within 2 weeks, a gentleman walked through my door saying, "Mary, I've heard you're open-minded. For this, there's no support groups. For this, they just think you're loony. You're just crazy." But it wasn't just his own experiences that he was asking for help with. His partner and the children, they were all having these experiences. And he would wake up with shaved areas on his leg, being aware he's been taken somewhere. Very, very real. The relatives wouldn't come to the house because they said, it was demons. And he said, "Well, can you help?" Fortunately, I'd read these 2 books that gave me an inkling into its reality. And he was a very credible middle-aged man, In fact, he's ended up being an author himself and a very good friend. But he opened me up to this. And that was when I started to go down the rabbit hole, because in 2 weeks later, somebody else walked through the door who was having experiences. Now, you tell me how that happens. It's like, something's going on here. What am I supposed to understand with this? I was doing advanced counseling at the time at the Wesley Institute, and I remember taking his case study.
And you were still in England at this
No,
point.
I'm in Australia now.
You're on Australia. Okay.
Because I migrated in 91, and I and that's when I continued my counseling, because I preferred that ultimately, because again, I was looking at healing from another level rather than, the allopathic medicine where it's drugs often as not, which, don't always help ultimately. But that's another story. I got very disenchanted with some of the medical models, let's put it like that. And I was looking at more holistic healing. Anyway, to cut a long story short, I was doing an advanced counseling course at the Wesley Institute in Perth. Took this very bravely, I thought at the time, thinking they'll either say he's crazy or not, but I'm going to ask them what they think, and there was social workers, a uniting minister and a few others from various areas of, psychological help and whatever. And I presented his case, expecting really them to say, well, he's probably a little bit, off the board, or is he schizophrenic, or all the fantasy prone, all these things. What was fascinating was nearly everyone in the group came up with an unusual experience, saying they'd either been in a haunted house or somebody had felt there were spirits. So instead of them actually putting the kibosh on it, they were actually saying, but I've had this unusual experience. I've had this. And so I'm thinking, hold on a minute, what's going on here, And ultimately, what I realized was there are obviously so many of us have these experiences that we never talk about because we don't know how they're going to be received. But I needed to do more research because that wasn't helpful to me, because I wanted to, how can I help these people? They're traumatized. They don't know what's going on. Their reality is denied, completely denied by mainstream. How can I help? And I teamed up with a social worker who was having experiences at the time. We started a support group. 12 people turned up at our very first support group, 12 in Perth, which was that by then only had a couple of million population or whatever. I mean, it was ridiculous. So that was the beginning of my journey. And since then, I've worked with about 3,500 families, children, all over the globe, in many, many countries. If they can speak English, I can work with them. And this has unfolded into being, what I can say is my life. I've written 2 books. One was Awakening, and I wrote Awakening as a resource book because so many people couldn't go to a psychologist or psychiatrist safely, because for many, they don't understand, because it's not part of, and I've met many psychologists that have had experiences that never talk about it. And even psychiatrists have had experiences that never talk about it, because it's still, there's a truth embargo on this as a reality. So what I did was, okay, I'll write a book to see if there's ways I can help people work with it if they've got no support around them. And it was, how do I know it's real?
Yeah.
What do I do about the fear? What are the indicators? All those kind of things to help them through that process, and with resources. So Awakening was my first book. Since then, though, I've written another book, which is really, I thought was only going to go out to those as weird as myself. But I was getting clinical psychologists, teachers, and parents writing to me, because I was talking about the children that are very different, and they're calling them, what is it?
Indigo.
Indigo, crystal, rainbow, golden children, all these different names. But the labels they're given by mainstream are often ADHD, dyslexic, autistic,
Yes.
Asperger's, because they're neurodivergent. And I believe that is part of the intergenerational link that's going through from parents that are having these experiences, are having children that are neurodivergent. And I've got a theory, I've no idea if I'm right, is that the intelligences that are, I believe, working with humanity's consciousness are trying to stop programming that isn't useful, because it's very hard to program an ADHD or an Asperger's or whatever. And I think that's to stop some of the limits that are placed on this your awareness, your multidimensional awareness, to prevent that being limited, because that's what happens when we get programmed into, it's only 5 senses, guys, everything else isn't credible or isn't valid. So there you can see I'm really a lost cause now when it comes to
Thank goodness.
So in a nutshell, now I can go into timelines, parallel universes, and I'm quite comfortable with that because that's where I've been.
Well, let's dig in. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your work with Edgar Mitchell and how you got into the Foundation for Research into the Extraterrestrial
Oh,
Phenomena.
well, what was wonderful is I knew Dr. Rudy Shield anyway because he was a friend and colleague because I'd met him several years in Newark in Newport, I think it was, with a group of friends. So I'd already connected to him. So Ray Hernandez, the lawyer
Now,
who
what year
wrote,
would this would have been back when?
we're looking at about 7 or 8 years now, I think. I can't remember the exact year. What happened, which was synchronous, was Ray Hernandez, who was a lawyer, had a tremendous experience with his wife and child, where he basically had his whole world changed from an experience where an energy being ended up being healing his dog in the house. I mean, it's quite an amazing story. He was an atheist. His wife was a Catholic. This triggered him wanting to understand what was going on. And it was really unusual because I'd got an email many months before that I'd missed completely, and it just came up on my computer again. And I apologized to Ray and said, look, I'm really sorry, but I realize you've had this profound experience and I somehow I missed your email. He said, well, I need to talk to somebody about quantum physics because I'm getting all these downloads of information, scientific information and what have you. I want to understand what's going on. And I said, well, I know a physicist. I said, Dr. Rudy Shield. And I introduced Ray. Within 24 hours, they'd connected. And it was Rudy that suggested he connects with Dr. Edgar Mitchell. So Ray ended up connecting with Dr. Mitchell. And from that, it was Ray had been given this understanding we had to look at this scientifically. We had to start getting research behind it because the interesting thing with all of this, Jim, with all of the fascination of, I believe, many millions, probably billions of people have had some form of experience or whatever. There's been no real credible research over a number of people because it's truth embargo. Everyone thinks it's crazy. Unless you've got ufologists, they might have 50 people they've done a survey.
How can you research something you deny exists?
You've got it in one. So it was like, we need to do something about this. And so Dr. Mitchell was very much on board to say, let's start to do something. And Ray was like, he just could not let this go. His own experience was enough to prove to him there was something really significant going on. And so we formed, the Dr. Edgar Mon-Fri Foundation. And the first thing we needed to do was get the information and do the surveys. And the surveys contained 600 questions that were looking at this very much from a conscious perspective, not the hypnosis. It was purely conscious. There were 4,200 individuals that participated in it. It was global. And in fact, the book, I've got them both here, actually. Beyond UFOs, sorry, I've got the book there. It's this thick. And it's got all the surveys. And what was fascinating about some of the surveys was some of the data that had never been known before about the whole experience, because most of the time it's been, it's little gray men, 4 foot tall, big black eyes. That's the end of it. That's what it's really about. When we were finding that mostly it was humanoids that were the first that people were seeing, of the most that people were seeing. Then it went down to the greys, and it went down to a whole range of other different types of beings. We've already discovered there's about 165 species of grey alone that people can experience or whatever. But the fascinating thing for us was, what was the outcomes? And some of these outcomes were completely different to what was out in mainstream. And one of them that was, well, the two I'll quote to you that were for me the most significant, because it was what I was finding in terms of my own clients, was how they changed in terms of philosophy, the way that they looked at life, the way they changed their lifestyle, more holistic, more caring for the planet, And one of the fascinating ones was that 85% acknowledged they had a psycho-spiritual transformation. 85% of those that were surveyed. Another one that would surprise people is that 50% of those that had experiences had healing on board craft, for example. So these are statistics that, you know, are generally not known. And one of the other most fascinating ones, and of course the nuts and bolts of ufology is, can't you bring something back from the craft or whatever? What we discovered was that in terms of the experiences, that 80, let me see if I can get the statistics correct now. I think it's 75% of those that had experiences, they were out of body, not physical. So that changes everything in terms of how do you assess this?
Amazing. 75%
Yeah.
of the people who assert they've had an experience of one kind or another with alien beings, it was not in a craft where they were taken up physically to a craft, but it was an out-of-body experience.
Yeah. Where they go onto the craft out of body. But the other thing, and this is, I know this is going to sound quite extraordinary, but what many of them, and I'll quote an 8-year-old to you that told me that his ancestors were the mantis kind of beings that he connects to. They're his ancestors. When he dies, he's going back to being a mantis. But when he goes up on board craft, he said, I evaporate into the mantis form. So he leaves his body and goes into that other form for a time and then comes back into his human body. And the stories that I've had of other experiences saying on board craft, they may go into another form like a gray. And I remember saying to one young lady, so she says, I'm a scientist on board in a gray form. So I said, where's your human body? And she said, oh, it's just over there waiting for me. And I said, so how do you get back to your human body? And she described a ball of light, her soul, literally going back in this ball of light back into a human body and then coming back down, you know, in a human form. So when you've got those this is information that completely challenges everything that we know. And this was why Ray was so, and obviously, you know, with what we're doing is we're showing that that consciousness is primary. It's consciousness we're talking about here. You know, we can't look at it, you know, as a little kid and say that we understand this because it's so profound and it takes us right back to what we call soul. And when you have a child tell you, and then I've got so many stories that I wrote about in The New Human, when a 10-year-old tells you that his last incarnation was when he was blue on another planet. This is his first human incarnation. He chose a mother that had been on this planet many times so that she could help him. And he's come here to help with the pollution on this planet. He's got the skills and the understanding to help with the pollution. This is a 10-year-old explaining his mission to you. I have countless stories of children explaining. One child that said, sorry?
Amazing.
Well, it is, because I'm getting these stories from children all over the world, different countries. The parents will write to me and explain. One child was explaining how he gets to other planets. And he says, well, I can go to other planets. He says, once I know their mathematical number. And I said, well, can you explain that to me? And he says, yes. He says, because when I know their mathematical number or frequency, I then can tap into going through a portal, he said, to that particular planet, and I can visit it because I know, again, mathematical number frequency. So he knows about this. The children talk about frequency. They talk about frequency for healing and how they know how to heal. And what I'm seeing is that many of the adults that are having experiences, when they get over the fear, start to have downloads. And these downloads can be for anything from quantum physics, right through to healing, right through to understanding the nature of reality. There's a whole range of different subjects, cosmic subjects. And I remember an 8-year-old in this very room saying to me that he goes up on the craft with 2 of his school friends. And he said they're in a group and there are other children. Sorry, there are other children there. And I said to him, so, you know, he said, some of them aren't aren't human. And I said, so some of the children aren't human. How do you know? He says, well, they look different. And he says, and we're taught how to use our mind and complex subjects. And I said to him, this is an 8-year-old explaining this to me. And I said, complex subjects, what do you mean? Can you tell me what some of those complex subjects are? He says, no, because they're too complex for you. What do you say to that? I don't know what you say to that. There's no answer to that, is there? But this is an 8-year-old saying, I won't understand.
Yeah.
So this is where I am now, is I'm talking to parents with children that are neurodivergent, for want of a better word. One of the interesting things that I realized was, I was talking to a gentleman, Neil Gold, in Hong Kong, who's an experiencer. He had interactions with the light beings from when he was a small child. And he explained to me, it was only in his 50s he realized he would be diagnosed as ADHD, and wrote a book, Close Encounters of the ADHD Kind. And I said to him, he said, I always saw reality in a complex way, more complex than other people. And he retranslated his ADHD as always dialed into higher dimensions, because it seems that this is how they are assisted to go beyond the very limited 3D reality. They can experience it multidimensionally. I had a 10-year-old tell me that he came through a portal in the sun because he comes from another dimension. Quite casually, this is where I come from. I had one 8-year-old explain to me who came from Europe, who said to me that they were a hybrid. And I said, what do you mean by that? She said, I'm part water being, part human. And I said, what do you mean by that? She said, I come from a water planet. And I've brought that in. And now when I look in the mirror, I see my water being, not my human self. But I am part water being, part human. And when I listen to music, she explained, that she not only hears it, but she follows the frequency to whoever it is that's created the music and understand the emotions behind the music. So she's able to expand her intuitive side to the point where she can connect to the source of that music. What do you do with that?
What do you do with that?
And this is when you talk to them and the child realizes that you're interested. They tell you, they explain to you. The kids that have said they go up with their best friend, might be a blue being, up onto board craft, and they're shown things. I remember one 8-year-old couldn't wait to tell me, she lives in America with her mum, couldn't wait to tell me 2 days prior to talking to me, she'd been taken on a craft to another planet, shown how to levitate, and shown how to use her abilities, but then was shown how they do genetic engineering. She was shown how they genetically engineer different species to go to other planets, seeding other planets, she said, not just in this dimension, but other dimensions. This is an 8-year-old explaining this to me. This is not on cartoons. This is not something an 8-year-old would normally tell you.
And presumably then their parents have identified their child as in some way precocious, say, and rather than shutting them down, they're trying to support them through this process, and they hear about you, so then you assist the parents and the child to become more comfortable and available to their experience.
Exactly, Jim. That's been, because the parents often have had experiences. They say, we've never mentioned anything to our children.
Yeah.
They're very responsible, and they make it very clear. And I know that's very much the case, because they don't want to program their child or front load them in any way. This comes spontaneously from them. And I've developed questionnaires where I ask questions that often parents don't even think to ask, but the child doesn't think it's abnormal. When a child says to you, when you talk, I see colors coming out your mouth, they're seeing energy in color and frequency, this kind of thing. And they're saying, what's going on, And I've had psychologists contact me that have been more open to, because they've come across these children, and the parents say, they're very, very different. We don't understand what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, and the psychologist is saying, I don't know where to go with this, because they've read enough to understand that there's not just hundreds. I'm not just thousands. I believe across the globe there will be millions, and a lot of them don't even understand what it is they're experiencing. They think they're crazy.
Yeah.
They do think they're
Well,
crazy, and
let me ask you this. We've had a number of people on Humanity Rising as we're exploring this phenomenon. And my mantra is we don't know what we don't know. So when different people come in, I try to be very open and welcoming and empathetic to whatever they want to put forward. There have been several people that have asserted that their information, based on what they know,
yeah,
is that the extraterrestrial presence on the planet is essentially rapacious. They have an agenda. They see humans more or less the way we see cattle, as a lower species, and that their basic intent is not benign. There are others that we have brought on, who believe that the ETs are on our side, and the more contact with the ETs in a democratic way, where people are just encouraged to make contact, the better, because what's at stake is the transformation of the human race into something that is capable of interacting with our cosmic neighbors. Now, where do you come out based on the 3,500 interviews with people with direct, authentic experience? How would you describe this phenomenon? What do you think is going on?
well, it's a good question. And it's one that I constantly look at because I can only go on the research that I've done, and I don't know what the government knows. I don't know any of that because, of course,
Yeah.
you don't. So I've got no background on the global, only on my own research. What I found from doing these surveys that we did with, which to me were very profound, was when you get 85% having a psycho-spiritual transformation, that's got to tell you something.
Mhm.
That's got to tell you something. When you've got people that suddenly get interested in healing, changing their lifestyle, changing their diet, wanting to help humanity and what have you after their experiences, that in itself tells you something. When I've gone into looking at what I think is that we have been genetically engineered by many different intelligences, I think, and the evidence is already there, the ancient aliens theory and what have you. I believe many of these gods were in fact, intelligences that visited our planet and upgraded us. And we have the evidence that we have been very likely genetically engineered. I believe a lot of these intelligences have been assisting us to gradually evolve into the species we are now. If they were, in fact, not benevolent, they could have taken us out at any time they choose. So to me, the fact that they are assisting us to evolve, and you've got children going on board craft, learning complex things, learning about taking care of the planet, ecology, where I've had experiences being taken up on board craft and shown you can't do this to your planet. You've got to take care of it. This is what you need to do. When you've got children saying, I've come here as an ecological engineer to help rearrange this planet into a more healthy, sustainable system,
Mhm.
to me doesn't
Mhm.
imply a negative agenda. I'm not saying that maybe there might be some species that have less than benevolent intentions, because I don't know for sure. But I do know that some of these abductions have been, and this goes into the conspiracy stuff, but I've worked with people who have been traumatized by how they've been, if you like, abducted by human agencies and had very negative experiences. And often the most traumatized have been those. And that's a whole nother area that I never knew I would be getting into. You just don't know when you go down the rabbit hole.
Say that again. Your last point.
There are agencies on this planet that have abducted those that have been on board craft to find out what has been taught to them, what they've
Oh,
been
yeah,
shown.
the government.
the government.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
We call it My Lab. There's Helmut Lemmer wrote a wonderful book on My Lab, about how the government knows about those that have had experiences, and they have the technology to abduct them and to actually interrogate them. And because they want to find out what goes on board craft, what do you learn, all these kind of things. And the highest trauma has always been those that have had My Lab experiences because of that. So that can be mixed in, and they can believe it's
Oh,
all.
yeah.
So you see, it's not straightforward. It's not black and white. There's a lot of other layers that as I worked with people, I realized that the most traumatized were generally the ones that had the human abductions, which we call My Lab, where they're taken to underground bases and they're interrogated and they're drugged. So this is the darker side of the truth embargo, which is we don't want people to know what's actually going on because they can talk about it. And that, it's a hard one to talk about because you don't want to think of your own species. But
Mm.
I'm not saying that there may be other intelligences that have other agendas. I can't prove any of that. I only know that what we found with our surveys with this 4,200 was primarily, most of them, 85%, had a psycho-spiritual transformation, and that awakened all their awareness. They would become more clairvoyant, more clairaudient. They would get information from science to ecology to a whole range of amazing abilities. And the children talk about it. They talk about one young, I think she was 9 in Sweden, was saying that she can change the nature of water with her frequency, with her consciousness. And the mother said the water tasted differently. It was like, a little bit of Masaru Emoto and the messages in water. She
Of
said that
course.
if she looked at water, she could send a frequency and change the composition and reprogram it into being more healthy. And she was explaining how she did it. This was a 9-year-old explaining this. She thought and spoke a certain frequency, and that would change the nature of water.
And was her experience that she'd gotten this faculty in some ways because of an abduction or a contact with an
Oh,
ET?
her contacts with a blue being, which was her best friend. I've actually got the name of it. It's in one of my many presentations where she talks about the name of this. I'm just trying. I've forgotten the name she called the little blue being, but the blue being was the one that helped her and helped her understand to use her abilities. So a lot of these children talk about going on board craft. I call it space schools, and they're taught a whole range of ways of using their consciousness to heal, to understand the nature of reality, to travel dimensions. And like this little boy said, he could go to other planets through a portal. And he explained he used the runes as a portal. And he could use as long as he knew the frequency of the planet, which was this mathematical number. This is an 8-year-old explaining this to me. You're thinking, right, okay. It's sort of like, right. And this is what I mean is a lot of things are taught on board craft. They're taught a whole range of things depending on what they see as their kind of Earth mission. Many of them talk about coming here, agreeing to come here as a soul from as
Mm, mm.
and what planetary system sometimes, or another dimension. Some will say I came from another dimension, like this 10-year-old said he came through a portal in the sun. That was how he got to this, and even talking about being aware of being in their mother's mummy's tummy, and choosing to do that as a soul. And these are 7, 8, 9-year-olds. I had one 7-year-old explain that he came from the future, and that his old form was like a gray, and he'd come back from the future because he had a job to do in this particular timeline. And this is a 7-year-old explaining this to me. He said some of the aliens have an IQ of over 400, he explained to me. So they're very, very bright, very, very intelligent. He was,
Sure.
this is, what do you do with that?
Yeah, well, if you think of Einstein, I think clocked out at about 160, 170. Think about how intelligent one would be with an IQ of 400.
Well,
That's pretty smart.
it's a 7-year-old coming out with this, I wouldn't have even know what an IQ was at 7 years old. You know what I mean? It's it's language that they're coming out with, which is so compelling. And the parents are saying, where does this come from? And many of the children seem to be naturally telepathic. I remember a young man telling me that him and his sister used to have telepathic conversations up to 5 or 6 years old, until she said to him, stop being lazy and start talking, because they had so much communication going telepathically. And a lot of the children know about telepathy, and they expect you to tune into them. And that's why some of them, I believe, are very slow in talking, because actually they are already reading you.
Yes. Yeah.
I remember a woman saying to me, my daughter's telepathic, and it's getting really hard because she's now 3 years old and she's still reading me, and it makes it very hard for me to watch my thoughts because she's tuning into me all the time. So this is the issue for the parent, is the kid reads me.
Extraordinary.
So,
I mean, it's amazing, Mary, that, normally we think of experiencers, we think of adults.
Yeah.
But you've had a huge body of work with children.
Yeah. That's why
And just so I make sure that I understand here, that these children are coming to you because in some way they've either been reporting an abduction experience or some type of ET encounter.
It's usually the parents that approach me because they are already experiencers themselves. Many of them are having experiences. Then they notice their child is different. Right from the word go, the child will be behaving differently or whatever. And they, one way or another, find me, because I've written a book called The New Human, which about half the stories are about the children from 3 years old talking about going up on spacecraft or whatever, or through a psychologist or through a teacher or someone that knows about this thing. And then when you start to talk to, if the child realizes that you're interested and you'll listen, because they think everybody else is the same. They think other people go on spaceships too, so they don't think it's extraordinary at all.
Right. And if you give them the space, they'll just start telling you all about it.
Start telling you, all about how they experience things, and then their best friend is the blue being that follows them around. I remember one young, I think she was 10 or 11. She said, at school, when I hear information from my teacher, and if it's not right, my special friend will say to me, you don't need to take notice of that. That's not accurate, or whatever. So she's actually getting information that's, debunking what the teacher's saying because it's not accurate.
It's like an interior GPT chat.
I said, do you ever talk about this? And she says, well, no, because Mummy said other people won't understand. I thought,
yeah.
It's the thing is, it's everywhere. There's so much going on, but people don't talk about it. This is what's blindsided me, really. When I wrote that book, I thought, oh, this is going to be put on the really weird.
Right.
I'm getting so just contact me, teachers, parents, academics, professors, all sorts of people that have had this experience and have gone into certain fields simply because they've wanted to understand their own experiences and not been able to.
Yeah. Now, let me just ask you, so you've got this, thousands of people that you had the 4,200 person study. You've worked with 30,500 individuals who in one way or another have experiences, many, if not most of whom have been children. Is there a network of people that are now working with experiences? Sirs, are you working solo there in Australia as best you can? Is there an international association of experiencer therapists, particularly with the children? I mean, this is explosive material that you have, and it's an extraordinary point of view that you have, which I must say, I'm finding profoundly reassuring.
Good.
Because, at the New Paradigm Institute, we're offering training programs, including in extraterrestrial awareness and communication. It's our position that humanity needs to be open-hearted with the extraterrestrial moment. We all need to learn to communicate as best we can with other species, with extraterrestrials, and that somehow there's a deep synchronicity between human transformation and our readiness for the next phase of human evolution. That's why the most important thing you've said to me is that 85% of the people said that whatever the contact was, it was psycho-emotionally, psycho-spiritually transformational toward the good, that they came out better people because of it. That's really important information.
And it was for me because it confirmed from my own personal research with my organization that I founded, the Australian Close Encounter Resource Network, was when I wrote Awakening, how extraterrestrial contact transforms your life, because it does. Ultimately, it does. Once they transcend their fears, they understand a huge new awareness of the soul and their spirituality and how it all makes sense. And even if they've had a fearful experience, I'll say to them often in a hypnosis, have you on any level consented to this? And they'll say, yes, before I came here as a soul. Wow. So it completely shifts from victim right from that moment to I'm part of this. Many of them connect to these star nations. They'll say, in my previous life, I realized I was Pleiadian, or I was Arcturian, or they will actually connect to their star families and realize they've chosen to incarnate in human form to help with this whole consciousness shift of humanity. So we're talking very much, this is a spiritual experience on every level. It's a spiritual experience. And for me, that's what is crucial in all of this, is that there's this understanding ultimately what they're gaining through their experience, even if it's been very fearful to begin with, transcending that fear and understanding more of their part in it has complete that you can have a 180-degree turn in terms of their perspective on how they're looking at this and what have you. And when you have these children coming in, one said to me, an 8-year-old that was in this very room, saying to me, he communicates with animals and he's here to help humans understand that they deserve respect and that we should be treating them with respect because it's really important. This is an 8-year-old explaining this to me.
Extraordinary.
Yeah.
Extraordinary.
That's why I'm convinced ultimately what we're having here is a transformation of consciousness through our interactions with these intelligences, many of them of course visiting this planet, and they give you a handful of different forms. I know of a whole family drawing the beings that they're interacting with, and the 17-year-old has drawn 240 images of different intelligences that she connects to.
Wow.
It is extraordinary.
Wow. I mean, this is leading me, the great line that not only is the universe more wonderful than you imagine, it's more wonderful than you can imagine.
Exactly.
Just to think of a 17-year-old girl that holds in her psyche a differentiated set of 270 plus distinct extraterrestrial beings.
Exactly.
And that means that the interpenetration between our cosmic reality, full of life, intelligence, creativity, and capacity to communicate, and what's happening on the human plane, if we really saw it for the complexity as it apparently is, the ecology would be fantastic.
It is absolutely mind-blowing. And this is what makes me so excited about the future of humanity, because I believe we're on the cusp of that. We are at a point where so many are having some form of communication or interact. Goodness knows what the numbers are, because I'm looking at one small portion of through my own research. I wouldn't like to guess or even propose any kind of numbers other than I think the whole planet through these different intelligences is having some form of interaction. Some of it will be unconscious, but for some it will be conscious if they're ready and they're aware to connect on that level. That's how I see it. So it's a planetary activation, if you like, a planetary.
It's a call to humanity, which right now is living in an immature, conflicted, almost a bestial way, barbaric way with everything that's going on around the world. It's a call for us to dramatically upgrade our consciousness and our spirit so that we can begin to operate at a higher and higher level. And these children are coming in to show us the way.
They're the teachers.
Yeah, they're the teachers.
They're the teachers. And when I say when we do need to operate to support them in a way we understand, is to provide the space for them to teach us without any of our programming getting in the way. So
Yes,
they can
exactly. It's out of the mouth of babes.
It's exactly that. It's exactly that. And that's why it's so, to me, it's so extraordinary and so beyond anything I could have imagined. And what is so exciting for our future is they're being born all over the planet in their, I believe in their millions, but very likely their billions, even if it's not understood. And I remember an Indian, it's in my book, and there's an young Indian man who said, Mary, I'm a star seed. He says, but the problem I have in India with my countrymen, they've got about 100 gods, he said, and they worship these gods, but they don't realize that they're worshiping extraterrestrials. He said, and I can't tell my family, he said, because they wouldn't get it. And he's so frustrated because he understands his own, from his own awareness, who he is and what's going on. But what do you do when they're worshiping them as gods when they're not?
Yeah. Well, Mary, bless your heart. You have uplifted my soul. It was starting to get a little heavy on Humanity Rising as we were listening to all these people with dark and dour analyses of what's really going on. But I think what I'm experiencing and listening to you is really an uplift in my soul, because my deepest intuition, which brought me into doing this full time, is that there's something fundamentally transformationally important about our ET contact, which is going to liberate humanity to its next phase and its higher self. And you've affirmed that in a very direct and simple way, again, out of the mouth of babes, through the children that you have been brought into synchronistic contact with. So I really thank you for who you are and what you're doing. And I hope that we can stay in touch and have you back.
An absolute pleasure, Jim. It's always wonderful to be able to share. And I thank you for doing what you're doing, because it's only through individuals like yourself that I get a chance to share what I'm learning, and I hope will help other people. So blessings to you too, and thank you.
Thank you. So that'll bring us to a close for today, everyone. That was Mary Rodwell, who is an angel amongst us for the work that she does in liberating all of us to what we know is the higher truth about possible futures available to us if we'd only rise to the occasion and listen to the children. Listen to the children. You'll all see the link to the after chat in the chat box, and then we'll see you here again tomorrow on Humanity Rising. But Mary, bless you. Thank you so much.
It's been an absolute pleasure, Jim, and take care. And hopefully we'll talk again sometime.
Very soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.